The Atlanta Stadium lights were on, as if heaven itself had descended to earth. The summer heat was stifling, but no one there seemed to care. Thousands of voices mingled in anticipation, like a pent-up roar about to explode. Suddenly, the camera moved, and the audience saw a familiar figure. It was him, Muhammad Ali, but not the same Ali the world had seen raise belts, defy presidents, and fearlessly declare, "I am the greatest." No, that man trembled. His arm, once as sure as lightning, wavered before the eyes of the planet. His body, once iron-like, now betrayed fragility. But it was precisely this fragility that made him a giant. Each step seemed to weigh tons. The stadium fell silent, as if no one dared breathe. Ali held the Olympic torch. The flame flickered, reflecting in the sweat on his face, in the deep, steady gaze that fought against a body already overcome by Parkinson's. The scene was brutal, painful, and at the same time impossible to look away from. The invincible was now human, and that humanity was greater than any belt. He raised the torch with difficulty. His hand trembled so much it seemed the flame would fall at any second, and for a moment everyone held their breath, as if they could hold the torch. With him, in that moment, the fights, the titles, the controversies didn't matter. What mattered was the man before the world. The same man who, decades before, had refused to fight in a war he didn't believe in. The same man who had faced imprisonment, insults, and yet remained steadfast. Now, there, he waged his most cruel fight, not against a rival in the ring but against his own body, and yet, he wouldn't give up. The flame was reflected in his teary eyes, and every gaze, in every corner of the stadium, was also wet. Parents hugged their children, athletes wept shamelessly. It was as if everyone knew they were witnessing something unrepeatable. A heavy silence reigned until the torch reached the Olympic cauldron. The flame spread, gigantic, illuminating the Atlanta sky. At that moment, the tears the audience had been holding back turned into deafening applause. It wasn't just applause for the ceremony, but for Ali's life. It was as if each clap acknowledged that this man, even weakened, was still the champion. Not of boxing, not just of the ring, but of courage, of the human spirit. Ali, trembling, smiled with effort, and that smile broke the hearts of those watching. It was the most painful, and at the same time, the most beautiful victory he had ever achieved. His face held the memory of all his battles, his youth in Louisville, his Olympic glory in Rome, his cry against the Vietnam War, his bloody nights against Frazier and Foreman. Everything seemed to fit in that moment. His body was now a prison, but his soul, free, still rose higher than any stadium. And perhaps that was the message. Even when the body betrays, the inner flame never dies. The whole world understood this without him needing to say a word, because Ali no longer spoke. He showed, and he showed with a flame, and when the fire lit up the sky, it wasn't just Atlanta that shone. It was every corner of the planet. It was every boy who once dreamed of being greater than his limits. It was every woman and man who, seeing that tremor, found the strength to face their own daily battle. The image of Ali trembling before the flame wasn't a sign of weakness. It was proof of greatness. A man who had faced kings, politicians, and rivals, and now faced illness with the same dignity. And he rose, even though he couldn't stop trembling. The Olympic flame burned, but it was Ali's heart that set the world ablaze. When he slowly lowered his arms, exhausted, the applause didn't diminish. The entire stadium stood, as if trying to hold him up so he wouldn't fall. Many wept, others chanted his name. But everyone, absolutely everyone, knew they were facing something eternal. The invincible man now demonstrated that true invincibility lies not in muscular strength, but in the courage to continue even when all seems lost. The flame was lit, and with it the entire world burned with emotion. At the end, as Ali slowly emerged, supported but still proud, many wondered if they would ever see another scene like that. The answer was no, because this wasn't just a ceremony. It was a man's entire life summed up in seconds, and at the same time, it was the lives of all of us reflected in a mirror. He showed that we all tremble, we all fall, but also that we can all carry our flame to the end. And so, with the torch still burning in the sky, a new era began. There he was no longer just the boxer, the champion, the loudmouth. He was a symbol, and symbols don't tremble. Symbols endure. The image of that trembling arm would live on, spanning generations, reminding the world that true greatness is measured not in titles, but in courage. And it was with this courage that Muhammad Ali ended that night. A frail man, yes, but an eternal giant. The entire stadium, and the entire planet, would never forget. The fire was already burning high above the stadium, but no one could forget the scene they had just witnessed. Muhammad Ali had walked out slowly, trembling, but his image was still burned into everyone's retinas. It was impossible not to remember the contrast. Ali, the same man who had once declared himself the greatest of all time, now struggled to lift just one arm, but deep down, that gesture carried more weight than all the belts combined. As the applause echoed, the cameras showed tear-stained faces. Athletes from different countries rose to their feet in reverence. Some beat their chests, others brought their hands to their faces, unable to contain their emotion. This wasn't just a boxer, this was a man who had become the very embodiment of endurance. That tremor, which could have been seen as weakness, was now a symbol of courage. His body was failing, but the flame he carried was greater than any illness, and the story of that moment gained even more power when compared to the past. The world remembered the boy from Louisville who won Olympic gold in 1960, still named Cassius Clay, full of arrogance and brilliance, the young man who shouted to the world that no one could stop him, the champion who danced in the ring as his opponents fell before his speed. That Ali seemed distant, almost a ghost. But paradoxically, he had never been so present. Because there was the complete man, not just the athlete. The world witnessed the most exciting outcome of a life, marked by challenges. There were no blows, no provocation, just a respectful silence before someone who had given his all. It was impossible not to think about his struggles outside the ring. When he refused to fight in Vietnam, he lost titles, was persecuted, judged, and humiliated. But he didn't give in. I have nothing against the Viet Cong. They never called me nigger. These words echoed around the world. He lost precious years of his career, but gained something no belt could give: respect. And that respect was now evident in every tear that fell in the stands. This man, once hated, was now loved by all, a universal hero. As the flame burned high above, the cameras flashed non-stop. The images were broadcast live to millions. Children who had never seen him fight now saw a fragile giant, and learned that greatness lies not in winning easily, but in enduring even when all seems lost. Parents explained to their children who this man was, and many said proudly, "This is the greatest of all time." But not for boxing, but for what he represented. Ali didn't say a word that night. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any speech. The whole world understood. The champion trembled, but the symbol remained firm. It was as if his fight against Parkinson's was, in fact, his final battle to prove something he had always believed, that within each person lies a power greater than any obstacle, and that the flame, even when the body can't handle it, can keep burning. While the stadium was still vibrating, many journalists were reporting that scene as the most emotional moment in Olympic history. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't just about sport. It was pure humanity. The contrast between the invincible Ali of the past and the vulnerable Ali of the present transformed the night into something eternal. There was no mask, no bravado, just a man before the world, fighting to keep the flame from falling, and winning, because the flame didn't fall, and perhaps this was his greatest victory, showing that, even defeated by his body, he could inspire billions of people. The Olympic flame shone in the sky, but the true flame was within each spectator. Every person who watched carried with them the image of that trembling arm and that steady gaze, a memory that would never fade. And if you're listening to this story now, realize this is the kind of moment that can't be forgotten. It's the kind of scene that deserves to be shared, commented on, remembered every day. So, if this memory also touched you, like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because stories like this need to be told. They need to be carried forward. Every gesture of support helps keep this flame alive, the same one Muhammad Ali lit that night, and together we can ensure it never goes out. The silence in the stadium had already turned to applause, but a question hung in the air. To what extent could Ali's courage inspire the world? The days that followed that moment in Atlanta were marked by a seemingly endless echo. The image of Muhammad Ali trembling before the world became a headline, a photograph, a symbol. Newspapers splashed the contrast. The greatest of all time faces his toughest fight. Newscasts replayed the moment in slow motion, and each repetition seemed to multiply the emotion. But for Ali, it wasn't just a spectacle. It was real life. His body no longer obeyed, words fled, but his heart remained steadfast. Parkinson's advanced mercilessly. The man who once defied giants now fought an invisible, silent enemy that corroded every gesture. Yet, what could have been a burden, he transformed into a message. He never complained in public, never asked for pity. On the contrary, he smiled, even when the tremor betrayed him, and that smile, as painful as it was inspiring, became a beacon for millions of people facing their own illnesses, their own silent battles. The Olympic flame lit in Atlanta didn't end that night. It spread to every corner, rekindling memories of Ali's glorious past. Many went back in time, reliving his most memorable fights. The victory against Sonny Liston when the 22-year-old shocked the world. The night in Kinshasa against George Foreman, when it seemed impossible to win. Or even the epic duels with Joe Frazier, each punch filled with hatred and respect. But now, looking back at 1996, it all seemed part of the same path. As if each blow, each challenge, had prepared Ali for his greatest fight. The struggle to remain standing even when his body gave way. And the most impressive thing is that he accepted this condition with dignity. He didn't shy away from the cameras. He didn't hide. He appeared trembling, yes. But hold art, it was as if the man who always said I'm the greatest had found a way to prove it without needing belts. Because being the greatest wasn't just about taking down rivals, it was about facing physical defeat with the same bravery he had faced champions. This lesson resonated deeply. Many of those who had criticized him in the past now revered him. The controversial, arrogant, irreverent Ali was transforming into the human Ali. Vulnerable, but even greater than ever. Privately, family members recounted how he never lost his ability to joke. Even when his hands wouldn't stop shaking, he'd crack jokes. Even when his voice broke, he'd find a way to elicit laughter. For him, life wasn't about regret, but about moving on. And perhaps that's why that scene in Atlanta resonated so much around the world. Because, deep down, everyone knew this wasn't a rehearsed performance. It was the raw truth of a man who had already conquered everything and now showed that the greatest victory is not giving up. The impact was so great that young athletes, many who weren't even born when Ali was champion, began to cite that moment as inspiration. If he could carry the flame, I can overcome my pain too. If he held on, I have no excuse to give up. The Olympic torch ceased to be just a symbol of the games. That year it became a symbol of human endurance. But for Ali, there was no glory in suffering. He didn't see himself as a hero. He simply did what he always did. He fought. He fought the disease as he had fought in the ring before. He fought with dignity, without hiding his scars. And, deep down, perhaps that was what moved him most. Because everyone knew that flame would not be extinguished anytime soon. And while the whole world applauded him, a new question arose. If Ali had already inspired millions with his strength in the ring, what would happen now, when he showed his fragility? Ali hesitated before the metal tunnel door, feeling the stadium's vibration ripple through the floor like an ancient drum. The producer spoke softly, almost guiltily. When it opens, you walk to the white mark. The torch arrives through the swimmer's hands. Lights, camera, cauldron. Lonnie squeezed his fingers, the tremor beating against his palm. Are you ready, champ? He took a breath like someone stepping up for the first round and nodded. I can do it. The word came out short, but complete. A volunteer offered water. He declined with a gentle gesture, the same gesture that once preceded perfect strokes. Outside, a rehearsed cheering section tried not to appear rehearsed, but the real stadium roared. Remember, whispered someone from the committee, if your arm fails, keep the flame close to the wick. Ali lifted his chin. It was the old ritual. Enter, look your opponent in the eye, accept the night as it came. This time the opponent didn't breathe. It lived inside him. In the hallway, two parallel conversations clashed: fear and faith. What if he can't light it? Whispered a technician, counting seconds on his watch. He'll make it, replied another, with no knowledge or guarantee, only conviction lent by the myth before them. Lonnie pressed his forehead to his as if sealing a pact. If it hurts, look at me. He smirked. It hurt before. He ran his knuckles over the metal of the still-cold torch, searching for the tactile memory of the gloves, the elastic on the wrist, the bell that called to the center of the ring. A tremor ran up his sleeve, and he reflexively clenched his fist. The tunnels, lamps, created small halos over his sweat. Each step bore the weight of 50 years of glory and falls. Clay, Ali, Cassius, whoever you are today, just walk, a volunteer joked, and he laughed briefly, as if still dancing inside. When the door opened, the world fell silent in slow motion. The staircase in the background, the flags suspended in the air, the warm breath of Atlanta holding breath. Janet Evans emerged into the light, bringing the fire as if bringing news from home. It's yours, she said in a vibrating voice, half English, half astonishment. There she extended her trembling hand, and in the moment the flame changed. Guardians, there was a collective pact. No one would judge that tremor. Everyone would hold it with their eyes. Thank you, he murmured, and he didn't need to. The entire stadium thanked him in return for being there. The camera closed on his face, revealing a gentle fear and an old pride. Slow, an off-screen coach instructed. Slow is strong, Lonnie replied, prayerfully. The hallway became a catwalk of courage. The torch, an extension of the heart. On the platform, the distance between the tip of the fire and the cauldron's wick felt like an eternity. Don't let it fall, he told himself, remembering the day he lost the title, the day he lost his name, the day he lost his grip. His arm trembled, and the tremor became language. Each oscillation said, I'm still here. The flame wavered. The hands around it moved half a step, but stopped, because that fight could not be invaded. Closer, someone instructed through the headset. He brought it. The fire licked the wick, refused for a second, as if testing its owner, and then accepted. Racing through the arch, rising like a scream held back for decades. The stadium exploded. Not with pyrotechnics, but with recognition. Ollie blinked twice. A small gesture of someone holding back tears. You did it, Lonnie said, and he finally let his breath fall from his shoulders. Minutes later, far from the light but still within the noise, the elevator descended slowly, the metal vibrating like a guitar string. A nervous volunteer tried to break the ice. Mr. Ali, I'll never forget. He looked up, gave a brief smile, and touched the boy's arm with the mark of the glove he no longer wore. Neither will I. His body was taking its toll, his forearm throbbing, his legs cottony, his sweat cold. But there was peace deep in his eyes, the peace that sometimes only comes after war. It hurt to see you trembling, the volunteer confessed, blushing with boldness. It hurt to hide, Ali replied, simply, truthfully, as if he'd waited years to say it. Lonnie straightened his white jacket, discreetly brushed away a tear trapped on his chin. Let's go home, champ. He nodded. The elevator stopped. Outside, the Atlanta night was a new biography that as they walked backstage, echoes of different languages told the same story. A Spanish cameraman wept behind the camera. An African athlete took off her sneakers and went barefoot out of respect. A Brazilian coach called his father and simply said, he lit it. Across the ocean, televisions in quiet bars became altars. The myth had been demoted, and so it was louder than ever. And yet, something remained in suspense. The flame in the sky burned, but what exactly had it ignited within each person? In that concrete corridor, Ollie paused for a second, as if hearing a distant bell. Do you know what you did, love? Lonnie asked. He searched for the words, found none, then raised his trembling hand to his chest, as if swearing, the answer would come, whole. The next day and would weigh more than any belt. The next morning, before Atlanta even opened its windows, the phone rang non-stop. Reporters, old rivals, children asking to speak for a minute with the champ. Lonnie jotted down names on a crumpled pad, while Ali, sitting at the table, silently watched the replay playing on every channel. His trembling arm was in close-up. The fuse holding out for a second became suspenseful, and when the fire rose, the world exploded with it. He put his hand to his face, as if taking a fever, but it was all emotion. Do you want to turn it off? Lonnie asked. He shook his head. No. He wanted to see it again. He wanted to confirm that the man on the screen was him, and at the same time, everyone else who needed courage to get through the day. A manila envelope arrived under the door. Inside, a short note scrawled in hesitant handwriting. I tremble too. Today I stopped being ashamed. He placed the note on his chest, closed his eyes, and breathed slowly, as if learning the rhythm of life again. The city reacted as, after a silent earthquake, nothing had fallen, but everything had shifted. In the newspapers, photos of a fist that wouldn't budge. On the radio, voices choked up trying to describe the indescribable. A taxi driver told a live broadcast that he pulled over to the side of the road just to cry. A teacher said she interrupted a history class to explain why this was history. In a hospital, an entire hallway applauded a patient after seeing Ollie light the torch on the television. If he can walk trembling, I can get out of bed, said the woman in room 12, and the nurse smiled, holding back her own tears. It wasn't the old glory script. There was no blood, no knockout, no belt raised in triumph. There was vulnerability exposed to the sun, and for some mysterious reason, this was the gesture people had been searching for years. Someone who, without hiding what hurts, still chooses to walk. There he received two visitors who entered timidly, as if stepping into a sanctuary. One was a young athlete, with eyes that still wanted to prove everything. The other, a man in a cap, with a weary look. Parkinson's in the same rhythm. The young man tried to thank him, stumbled over his words, and ended up asking what everyone wanted to know: how come you didn't freeze? Ali searched deep within himself, then answered as best he could. He touched his chest with his fingertips, a simple gesture, and then pointed to the door through which the stadium light had come. The man in the cap understood first. He's saying he pushed through the fear inside and walked toward the light. The young man nodded, with tears he didn't even try to hide. Lonnie broke the silence with a cup placed on the table. He trained his whole life for nights like that. We just didn't know it. In the afternoon, the delegation gathered for formal photos, but it turned into something different. A coach asked them to put away the flashes. No show, he said. Today is about gratitude. They brought a board with the image of the lit cauldron and a blank space next to it. Each person present wrote a short sentence, not about the myth, but about the human. Thank you for not hiding your hand. Thank you for teaching us not to run from what trembles. Thank you for lighting for us when we were still afraid of the dark. Ali read slowly, using his eyes as if touching braille on paper, and then pointed to the board as if to say, "It's not mine." He bounced it back to the room, as he always did with spotlights, and, for the first time in a long time, those who received the ball didn't shy away. Athletes, coaches, volunteers, each embraced their own little flame, unafraid of failing in front of the others. That night, when the city quieted down, the room was just the two of them, him and Lonnie. There were no more cameras, no speeches, no outstretched hands, just the hum of the air conditioning and that irregular cadence of fingers. "Are you tired?" she asked. He nodded. "Was it worth it?" she ventured. He didn't answer with words. He picked up the brown note again, placed it in the middle of the book on the table, and tapped it lightly, as if sealing a contract. The answer was there. It was worth it, because it wasn't about him. "You lit people up, love," Lonnie whispered. He smiled with his eyes, and the room was filled with a peace that can't be written. In the silence, a voiceless thought filled the space. His career may have defined his name, but it was his exposed fragility that completed the work. The boy from Louisville, the world champion, the man who said no to war, they all fit into the old man who trembled without hiding. Days later, when routine had already reoccupied the world, boxes of letters arrived. A child drew two arms, one firm, the other trembling, and an arrow connecting them with the word courage. A former rival wrote that he saw in those hands the same danger as before. "You still bring us down, but now you bring us down from within." A prisoner sent a newspaper clipping with the title of the ceremony and an underlined phrase, "I don't have muscles, I have faith." There, he didn't read everything, he felt. He ran his fingertips over the lines, as if each stroke held heat. And when he asked to replay the video of the lighting, it wasn't vanity, it was study. It was confirmation that the gesture had found the right world at the right time. That the torch wasn't just burning gas, it was burning shame, hollow pride, the fear of exposing weakness. The fire, finally, had a function. On his last night in Atlanta, he asked to walk a bit. Lonnie took his arm, and the two of them walked, slowly through the streets, where the game's banner still fluttered in the warm wind. They passed a group practicing for a night run. No one approached. A discreet wave, a bow of the head, was enough. There he stopped before a reflection in the window. The man in the mirror was different, and yet he was the same. He remembered the boy who said he could fly, the adult who returned insults with poetry, the father who laughed loudly in the kitchen, the believer who made silence his new way of speaking. The flame at the top of the stadium was still lit, but the one that mattered now burned in an invisible place. "Shall we go?" Lonnie asked. He nodded and, before turning, touched the glass with his fingertips, as if thanking his own history for not abandoning him. When his body decided to go first, and this is where history finds its rest, not an end, but a landing. The moment Muhammad Ali lit the torch in 1996 was not just a landmark chapter in the Olympics. It was a public demonstration that human dignity does not depend on the absence of tremors, but on the decision to walk despite them. Fragility does not diminish us, it reveals us. The body can be defeated, the voice can falter, the step can stagger, but the courage to expose oneself, to offer the world what remains, transforms fear into meaning. For those who carry illness, guilt, falls, or silence, the lesson is straightforward. There is no need to wait for the perfect day to be a beacon. The flame does not require muscles, it requires presence. And when a man trembled before the planet without giving up the gesture, he reminded us all that greatness lies not in the steel of the fist, but in the fire we choose to harbor. Burning hurts, but it illuminates, and when it illuminates, it paves the way for those who come after.